That was the first sentence that echoed through the dojo when Maya stepped inside. It wasn't spoken out loud, but you could see it in the smirks, the side glances, the shaking heads. She looked like she didn't belong. Maya wore loose, faded joggers and an old white t-shirt. No flashy gear. No gym bag full of equipment. Just a water bottle in one hand and a quiet, uncertain gaze. Her hair was tied in a simple braid, and her soft features gave her more of a schoolteacher vibe than that of a fighter. She looked harmless. And in a place like this dojo, where intensity, strength, and reputation meant everything, being harmless was the same as being invisible, or worse, a joke. The dojo was buzzing that day. It was the advanced class, packed with skilled martial artists, many of them black belts who had trained for years. You could hear the sharp snap of fists slicing through the air, the thud of controlled kicks landing on heavy bags, and the instructor barking commands that demanded perfection. These fighters moved with purpose. They were confident, disciplined, and dominant. Most had sculpted muscles, clean uniforms, and belts that showed their rank and pride. They had spent years earning their place in this room. And then there was Maya. She stood near the door, unsure where to go. She scanned the room with curiosity, maybe even admiration. There was no fear in her eyes, but she also wasn't trying to assert herself. She seemed too calm for a place that thrived on energy. One of the black belts nudged another and whispered, "New girl. Doesn't look like she's made for this." The other snorted, "She's gonna tap out after the warm-up. Just wait." Some of the others chuckled under their breath. One girl tilted her head and muttered, "Is this her first time in a gym?" Another added, "Maybe she thought this was yoga." Maya didn't hear the comments. Or maybe she did and simply didn't care. She walked up to the front desk, quietly signed her name on the class list, and bowed to the instructor as a sign of respect. The instructor gave her a polite smile, but even he seemed unsure. After all, people like her usually didn't last more than one class. But something about Maya was different, though no one realized it yet. She didn't come in looking to prove anything. No flexing, no fake bravado, no stories about past training. Just observation, quiet focus, and a strange sort of presence that was easy to miss if you weren't paying attention. The instructor assigned her to the back row, where new students usually began. Maya followed instructions with care, stretching, warming up, mimicking the movements. She wasn't flashy. She wasn't fast. But she was fluid, controlled, focused. Still, the mocking didn't stop. Two black belts whispered while eyeing her during kicks. "She doesn't even lift her leg high enough. This is embarrassing." She probably thought karate would be a fun hobby, like pottery or painting. The air around Maya was thick with silent judgment, but she never once looked around, never once tried to fit in or impress. She stayed in her zone, like someone used to being underestimated. And that was the first sign. Not fear, not nervousness, just quiet patience, like she was waiting not for approval, but for the right moment. No one knew her background. No one cared to ask. But what they didn't know was this. Maya had walked into far more dangerous places than this dojo. She had faced far more brutal opponents than these black belts. And she wasn't here for recognition. She was here for discipline, for something real. The class continued. The tension stayed. The laughter behind her back didn't fade. But Maya? She stood in the back of the room, simple, silent, and still completely underestimated. And soon, they would all learn just how dangerous that mistake could be. From the moment the class officially began, all eyes kept drifting back to Maya. Not because of anything impressive she did, but because she clearly looked different. Lost, like a quiet bird that had accidentally flown into a cage full of lions. The instructor began leading warm-ups. The rest of the class moved in perfect sync, stretching with force, punching the air with power, twisting their bodies with years of muscle memory. Maya tried to follow, but she moved slower, more carefully. Her stretches weren't as deep. Her punches looked like she was testing her own limits. She looked like someone learning everything from scratch. And that was enough to trigger the whispers. "She's going to cry by the end of this class." One black belt muttered to another, barely hiding his smirk. "Why do they even let people like her join the advanced group?" She probably got lost and ended up here by mistake. A few others chuckled softly, their voices dripping with condescension. These were fighters used to dominance, people who wore their belts like trophies. To them, Maya was a joke that had somehow wandered into their sacred space. One girl, Lisa, walked up during a short break and bent over to whisper, "You okay? Wanting to show you how to do that stretch again." Her voice was sweet, but her smirk said something else. Maya looked at her and simply nodded, not because she needed help, but because she saw no reason to argue. Her focus remained inward, as if she wasn't hearing the noise around her, as if she had built mental walls long ago. Another fighter, Jaden, offered to help her fix her form during a drill, but the way he touched her elbow and corrected her stance was more about showing off than assisting. It was clear. These people weren't trying to support her. They were establishing a hierarchy, and Maya in their eyes was at the bottom. Still, she said nothing. She didn't snap. She didn't try to prove herself. She just kept going, one movement at a time, her breathing steady, her posture straight, her energy focused like a laser. It was confusing for them. Most new people either tried too hard to impress or crumbled under pressure. But Maya didn't do either. She stayed calm. She didn't look scared, but she also didn't show any signs of rebellion or anger. She moved like someone who wasn't new to struggle, someone who had danced with discomfort before and learned to walk through it without drama. That kind of silence made people uncomfortable. One of the more aggressive black belts, Rico, scoffed during a water break. "She's just quiet because she's embarrassed. Wait until sparring starts. She won't survive 2 punches." Another chimed in. "Bet she Googled how to join karate and thought this would be fun." They laughed again, but there was something they didn't see, something Maya had already revealed in subtle hints. Every time she repeated a move, she refined it. Every time she got it wrong, she fixed her stance without being told. Her body wasn't flailing, it was adjusting, adapting, absorbing. She wasn't failing, she was processing. And those who were smart, like the assistant instructor watching from the corner, began to notice. "She's not scared," he thought to himself. "She's reading the room." Yes, Maya looked quiet and slow, but her eyes were scanning every movement around her, reading patterns, understanding timing, learning how the class moved like a machine. She didn't care that they were laughing, because she wasn't here for them. Maya was there for a reason, and it had nothing to do with earning a black belt or showing off her strength. She was there for something deeper, something they wouldn't understand until it was far too late. The warm-ups were over, drills complete, muscles stretched and egos inflated. Now came the part everyone had been waiting for, sparring time. It was the dojo's way of separating the talkers from the fighters. And for the black belts, it was also their favorite moment to show dominance. As the instructor announced the matchups, a few names were called. Pairs stepped onto the mat and began circling, focused and fierce. But then a different kind of energy entered the room, the kind that turned sparring into spectacle. Ryan, tall, broad, loud, raised his hand and grinned. He was one of the dojo stars, known more for his mouth than his humility. His ego was the only thing bigger than his roundhouse kick. "I'll take the newbie," he said loudly, flashing a grin at his friends. "Promise I won't break her." The room laughed. The instructor hesitated. Everyone knew Ryan didn't really go easy, not even on experienced fighters. But Maya looked calm and nodded gently, indicating she was okay with it. The coach gave a reluctant nod, and just like that, the dojo turned into a stage. Phones quietly came out of gym bags. A few students leaned in, whispering, "This is going to be ugly." Ryan bounced on his toes, stretching his neck, cracking his knuckles. He wasn't nervous. He wasn't even serious. He looked like someone about to swat a fly. He looked over at Maya, who stood silently on the mat, hands at her sides, waiting for the signal. "You ready?" he asked, half mocking, half amused. Maya nodded once. No words. No tension. The bell rang. Ryan stepped forward confidently, throwing a playful jab. Not too fast, just enough to test her reaction. He expected her to flinch, maybe back away, maybe freeze like most first-timers do when a seasoned black belt moves in. But Maya didn't flinch. She moved. Quickly, smoothly, with the kind of grace that looked almost too effortless. She ducked under his arm, spun on the ball of her foot, and before anyone could register what had happened, Ryan was on the ground, flat on his back. The sound of his fall echoed louder than the bell had. The laughter stopped. Conversations froze. Even the phones lowered slightly as people stared in disbelief. Ryan blinked, confused. He sat up, trying to brush it off. "Lucky move," he said, rubbing his elbow as he stood. He got back into stance, this time. No more jokes. He came at her again, faster now. A combination, one punch, then a kick. But Maya read it like a book. She blocked the punch cleanly, stepped inside his range, twisted, and delivered a subtle but precise throw that used his momentum against him. Down he went. Again. Now the phones were up again, but this time, not to laugh. This time, to record the unthinkable. Ryan got up slower now. His smile was gone. His cheeks flushed red with embarrassment. His friends on the sideline were speechless. The room was wrapped in tension. And Maya, still calm, still steady, breathing controlled, posture upright. No smugness, no celebration. She didn't even glance at the crowd. It wasn't luck. It wasn't a one-time fluke. Her movements were intentional, trained, deadly. The coach stood with arms crossed, expression unreadable. But behind his stillness, gears were turning. He had seen enough fighters to know the difference between a beginner and someone dangerous. And what Maya just did, twice, wasn't beginner's luck. It was mastery hidden in humility. For the first time in that dojo, people stopped seeing her as the quiet one. They started asking the question, who is she? One throw. It happens. Maybe she got lucky. Maybe Ryan misstepped. Maybe she reacted on instinct. That's what they told themselves, because the alternative was too strange to believe. But then Ryan stood up again, and this time he wasn't smiling. His cocky confidence had vanished, replaced with a clenched jaw and narrowed eyes. He shook out his shoulders, repositioned his stance, and gave Maya a hard stare. This wasn't about fun anymore. Now it was personal. He moved fast, much faster than before. He came at her with precision, throwing a sharp front kick aimed at her ribs, a move designed not to hurt, but to shake her balance, test her timing. And then it happened again. Maya didn't flinch. She shifted to the side, raised her arm, and blocked the kick with a calm fluidity, like she had seen it before it was even thrown. Without hesitation, she stepped into his space, hooked his leg from underneath, and twisted her hip in one swift movement. Ryan hit the ground again, harder this time. This wasn't a lucky moment. This was technique. Pure, clean, controlled. And the dojo fell completely silent. A few black belts stood from the sidelines. One whispered under his breath, "Who is she?" Others just stared, unsure what they were witnessing. She had no black belt around her waist, no name tag, no crowd of students watching her in awe. She had walked in like a stranger, and now she was the center of gravity in the entire room. Maya stood in position, waiting quietly, offering Ryan the respect of another round. But he didn't get up right away. He stayed on the ground, breathing heavily, staring at the mat, not in pain, but in disbelief. His pride had been knocked down harder than his body. The instructor slowly stepped forward, his eyes fixed on Maya. He didn't say anything, but the look on his face said enough. This woman is not what she appears to be. One of the assistant trainers leaned toward him and whispered, "We need to know her background." Because now, nobody believed she was a beginner. Her footwork was too efficient. Her blocks were timed with surgical precision. Her counters flawless, almost instinctual. No wasted energy. No exaggerated movements. Just the kind of control that only comes from years of discipline and real-world application. And the most shocking part? She made it look easy. There was no showboating, no grinning, no taunting. She didn't even look like she was proud of what she'd done. She looked peaceful, as if this wasn't unusual for her, as if this kind of fight was nothing new. She wasn't fighting to win. She was simply responding to a threat with the efficiency of someone who had done it before, in places far more dangerous than a padded dojo floor. The black belts exchanged glances. For the first time in a long time, Their egos had been silenced, and that silence echoed louder than applause. Ryan eventually stood up, nodded respectfully at Maya, and walked away, without saying a word, because even he knew this wasn't someone to mess with. That moment changed everything. Maya had walked in as a mystery, but now, she was a mystery people wanted to solve. Who was this woman with no belt, no voice, and no need to prove herself, yet possessed a level of mastery that made seasoned fighters sit up straight? Whatever her story was, one thing was clear. This simple woman had just shaken the foundations of the entire dojo. The next day, when Maya walked into the dojo, everything felt different. Gone were the whispers, the sideways glances, the amused chuckles. Gone was the atmosphere of doubt that had followed her the day before. The room that once had no time for her now seemed to pause, as though collectively holding its breath. Maya entered the dojo the same way she had the day before. No flashy gear, no fanfare, just simple clothes and a focused look in her eyes. Her hair was still tied back in the same no-nonsense braid. She didn't seek attention. She didn't need validation. Yet this time, she wasn't invisible. Heads turned as she moved through the room. And it wasn't mockery that sparked the glances. It was genuine respect. It was like a switch had been flipped overnight. The same faces that had once laughed at her, that had assumed she didn't belong, now studied her carefully. As she moved through warm-ups, her form became the subject of silent admiration. They couldn't help but watch as she glided through each movement, her transitions smooth, her body controlled, her movements almost effortless. They were trying to learn from her. The black belts who had once scoffed at her quiet presence now found themselves watching her in awe. They observed how she held her stance with perfect alignment, how she moved with precision and poise, and how she worked through every drill with consistency. Some of them exchanged hesitant glances, and a few, unable to ignore the undeniable truth before them, approached her for help. "Hey, Maya," one of the senior black belts said, his voice quieter than it had been yesterday. "Could you show me that sweep you used during the sparring session? The one that caught me off guard." Another black belt, who had been particularly dismissive of her the day before, nodded with a sheepish smile. "I think I've been misplacing my weight when I do my roundhouse kick. Could you show me what I'm doing wrong?" Maya didn't respond with pride or even a hint of satisfaction. She didn't remind them of the jokes they had made, the assumptions they had voiced just hours before. She didn't say, "See, I told you so." She just helped. Kindly, quietly. She demonstrated the sweep with the same focus she had used in the sparring match. She gave detailed advice about improving stances and footwork, and when someone asked to spar, she agreed without hesitation. She didn't ask for anything in return. She wasn't looking for acknowledgement. All she wanted was to give what she knew, to share her expertise, and to keep learning, just like everyone else. What amazed them the most was that Maya never boasted. She didn't gloat. She wasn't doing it for the attention. Unlike most in the dojo, she didn't need to parade her victories or prove she was better than anyone else. Her actions spoke louder than words ever could. Even the instructor, who had watched from the sidelines, approached her that morning. With a respectful nod, he asked her to help guide the advanced sparring session. Not because of her belt, there was no black belt around her waist. Not because of her reputation, there was none. But because of her discipline, her control, and her presence. He had seen it now. Her ability to stay focused, her understanding of technique, and most importantly, her humility. The same humility that allowed her to give and receive feedback with grace. That quiet yet commanding presence that naturally brought others to seek her advice. In just one day, Maya had gone from being the invisible girl in the dojo to someone who had earned the respect of everyone in the room. The same people who had dismissed her just 24 hours ago. And the most incredible part, she didn't say a single word to demand respect. She didn't flaunt her skills. She didn't ask for accolades. She simply showed up, did the work, and left with her head held high, knowing she had earned something far more valuable than any trophy, the respect of her peers. Maya proved something that many often forget. True strength doesn't announce itself. It doesn't wear flashy uniforms. It doesn't need to shout. It just shows up, quietly, humbly, and confidently. It does its job, It excels without expectation, and it leaves with its head high, knowing that real strength doesn't need validation from anyone else. Her silent power had reshaped the entire dojo. In the end, Maya didn't come to the dojo to prove a point. She didn't come to show off. She didn't come to win trophies. She didn't even come to teach anyone a lesson. She came for herself, to challenge herself, to improve her own skills, refine her technique, and sharpen her mind. But even though she didn't intend to, Maya ended up teaching everyone in that dojo something far more profound than any move, any technique, or any score on the board. Through her quiet strength, her self-discipline, and her humility, she demonstrated a lesson that was more valuable than any belt or accolade. Strength is not always loud. In the world of martial arts, and especially in the dojo, it's easy to believe that strength is displayed in physical dominance. The loudest punches, the highest kicks, the bravado that comes with wearing a black belt or winning competitions. But Maya had shown them that strength doesn't always have to announce itself. Her movements weren't over the top. They were deliberate and calculated, precision over power. There was no need for flair, no need to shout about her accomplishments. Her strength was in her silence, in her control, and in her ability to stay focused, no matter the situation. Her actions, those perfectly executed counters and flawless sweeps, spoke for her. They spoke with such clarity that no words were necessary. No one had to be told she was powerful. They saw it. They felt it. They experienced it firsthand. And that's when they realized, strength doesn't always wear a belt. Strength doesn't need validation. Strength doesn't rely on flashy moves or a loud voice to be felt. Sometimes the quietest person in the room can be the fiercest warrior, the one who doesn't seek attention, the one who doesn't need to prove anything to anyone, the one who's been through enough in life to know that true power is silent. It's earned, not displayed. Maya had lived a life where strength was forged in adversity. She didn't need to brag or boast. She didn't need anyone to see her victories, because she already knew her worth. The only one she had to prove herself to was herself. And by walking into that dojo, she wasn't showing off her skills. She wasn't looking for recognition. She was simply looking for growth. She wanted to sharpen herself, test her abilities, and perhaps discover just how far she could push herself in a new environment. What she didn't expect was that her quiet, humble approach would transform the entire dojo. The same black belts who had mocked her, who had whispered about how she didn't belong here, were now asking for her advice. They were now learning from her, not just her technique, but her approach to life, her ability to stay grounded, even when the world around her tried to knock her down. The lesson she gave them wasn't just about fighting. It wasn't about techniques or fighting styles. It was about strength, true strength, the kind that comes from within, the kind that doesn't need to be declared, doesn't need to be shouted from the rooftops, the kind that just is. So the next time you meet someone who seems too simple, too quiet, or too out of place, remember Maya, because the most dangerous fighter in the room might just be the one who doesn't need to show it. She might be the one who's simply there to learn, to grow, and to become better, not for anyone else's approval, but for her own. And that's the kind of fighter you should never underestimate. The most dangerous fighters don't rely on bravado. They rely on substance, on character, on discipline. And when the time comes to face the world, they step forward with strength that doesn't need to be announced. It just is.